Welcome to the Leading Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Dubose. Here in the Leading Lounge, we talk with today's leaders and unpack lessons learned and being learned from a career of leading and communicating in their field. These conversations are designed to be both informal and informative, and we want to equip you with wisdom and tools to empower you as a leader where you are and where you want to be. Hey, Happy New Year. Happy 2023. Thanks for joining us for our second season of the Leading Lounge. Last year, we had over 1,000 unique listeners to our episodes, which was incredible to me. And this year, we're going to get started with a bang. A really exciting interview with one of the most interesting people I think you'll have the chance to listen to. His name's Brodie Cooper, and he is a rare combination of a professional fisherman, a published author, an organizational leader who's expanding into multiple territories, multiple states, growing like crazy. He leads a men's ministry called Blast Cast. It's a hunting and fishing ministry that reaches men for the gospel of Jesus. And to do that, he has to do all those things that I mentioned, plus compel volunteers with this vision to reach people through the outdoors with the gospel. So enjoy Brodie and all that he has to say. Here he is. All right, guys, welcome into another episode of the Leading Lounge. Today I've got Brodie Cooper, who is the executive director, right?
That's right.
Executive director of Blast Cast Ministries here in Baytown, where we both live. So appreciate you giving me some time, man, sharing some insight with me. I always like to start off with people by just asking them to tell me about how they got to where they are. So your journey, I mean, it could be personal, professional, however you want to do it.
There's not much of a line between personal and professional these days. They're all heavily intermixed, which is one of the biggest challenges that I have in life now. But I was raised in the outdoors. I'm part of the outdoor culture. And so I've always been into hunting and fishing. It's just, that's where I find me. That's where I find some peace. It's where my thoughts get quiet. I can just focus on one thing and do it. And you just focus on catching fish or finding a deer or whatever it is that you like to do. And I speak that culture. And so I spent some time in doing missions work. I lived in China for a year as a missionary and had a lot of training through Campus Crusade for Christ after my college years, and had a sincere faith. And when I got back and started getting into just real life stuff, you know, a job, family. I was working for a mutual fund company at the time. I was still an outdoorsman and I was passionate about my faith. And so I just was sharing my faith with outdoorsmen because that's who I was around. Mm-hmm. I was hunting and fishing. And so whoever was in a boat with me or at deer camp with me, they were going to hear my story. It just evolved into there. So I got invited to a men's retreat 1 year from a church, and a couple of years later, I took it over and revamped the focus of it and made it into an outreach ministry that we could reach guys that we quit inviting people from church. We started inviting just duck hunters to come on this duck hunt with us, had people from all over the nation show up, and it turned into this really neat mission trip where people from all over would come in, enjoy a cheap hunting trip for a weekend. And we'd have devotions in the evening. We'd have a pastor that was like my best friend, Rob Purdy, was a Marine. He's done all the jobs on Most Dangerous Catch that you see on TV. He was a guy that crawled in the crab pots, debate pots. We'd have somebody like that speak that men can relate to. And we just built relationships in the outdoors, doing what we loved. And I led Blast Cast as a volunteer for, almost 15 years. And it just kept growing and growing because there was a need and a demand for it. And eventually it came time to take a step of faith. And it became a full-time job with no money, having no idea how it would work. And I didn't know how to run a nonprofit, but I had some administrative gifting and some legal gifting, so I could figure the stuff out, but took a giant leap of faith. And now I've been working for Blast Cast full-time for almost 8 years. And have a full-time assistant, have a part-time regional director. I'm now hiring a full-time regional director because we have 4 chapters that are in Texas, 1 in Louisiana, 1 in New Mexico that also operates in Colorado. And then we're looking to start up in Florida, Arkansas, and Washington as early as next year. So it's like my plate is big time full. That's kind of how I got here. The very short summary.
No, I'm sure there's a lot more wrinkles in there. So yeah, you're one of the few guys I know that do this full time. Like I know a lot of outdoorsmen or even people who do that in conjunction with a ministry, an outreach of a church or a prayer church. But yours is different because this is what you do, full time, like you said, for the last 8 years. So when you go from it being almost like a hobby to now it's a formalized nonprofit, you're in like an official, legal role as the head.
Sure.
You've got a board.
Do?
Yeah. So you got all these things, budget, all these things to do. And you and I have talked about this a little bit, but one of the struggles that I face is once it becomes formalized, now you got the whole burden of administration. So how do you balance doing what you love and what's really like the heart of the ministry, which is being out with guys, hunting, fishing, all that, with having to sit in an office administering this beast? Like, how do you do that?
Well, it is a job and they do pay you for a reason. That's because you don't get to do all fun stuff all the time. So I think part of it is just setting in your head that, hey, with this comes a lot of work. And that's the reason you get paid. You get paid for the things you don't want to do. I would be a missionary and sharing my faith with people and hunting and fishing no matter what. You don't have to pay me to do that. I just love to do it. So it's going to happen. The administrative stuff and the professional stuff, that's what I get paid for. And that's what I earn, the little bit of money that you don't get paid a lot in nonprofit world. But hey, you have some sacrifices. So one thing I think is it's important to note for people that aspire to do something like this is they don't realize how much of the job is administrative in nature. And if you don't have a really strong business sense and you don't have a good idea of how to lead a really diverse group of people with different interests, different gifts, different skill sets, if you can't organize those people and put them into some type of a team where there's cohesion and people playing their roles, and then if you can't handle the difficult business decisions, the finance decisions, the just setting up your administration, your organization is only going to be as strong as your administrative base. So if you're really passionate about sharing Jesus with people and about reaching outdoorsmen, you can only do so much as your administrative base allows. So if you try to short the administrative base, then the part that you love is going to suffer down the road. So to me, that's the motivation. The harder I work on the administration, the business side, the legal side, all those merchandise, like branding, social media, all those things that come with really any business, the harder I work with that, the more the ministry succeeds. And those are the things that I love. So it opens doors in other areas. So in a sense, I use the work to build in and feed the passion. Balancing time, that's always difficult. But in reality, my job is the organization can only grow so much around me. So my job is really to create opportunities for other people to succeed. And the easiest way for me to create opportunities for others is to lay that administrative business groundwork. If I can do the social media, if I can take care of the tax reporting and the receipts and the fundraising and the merchandise and the legal stuff behind the scenes, the insurance, all those things, then all these guys who are just volunteers, all they have to do is show up and do the fun stuff. They show up, they hunt and fish with us, they share their faith, they volunteer for those leadership roles that everybody sees, the ones at the events. And that makes it more fun for your volunteers. So what I'm doing really by putting in all that work in advance is I'm creating opportunities for somebody like you to succeed. You already have a full-time job, but if you come to a Blast Cast event, hey, just come share your faith and hunt and fish with us. I'll take care of all the nitty gritty.
Which is your bread and butter anyway.
That's
what
it.
I'm saying. Like the more time you put into that, the better it is for when you actually do the events, which in turn helps you out, helps you.
And then the organization can grow. We can reach more people overall because you have more people who are engaged and more people who are spending time doing what they love, not in the nitty gritty business stuff. I'll take care of that stuff so that they don't have to. That keeps me motivated.
Yeah, no, that's good. Was there a certain point at which you recognized like, okay, this is now, I'm going to have to do this administrative stuff and require a salary to pay me for the time to do this stuff so that this part over here can really grow?
We hit a wall. It was back around 2008, I think, is when we started realizing we were hitting limits. And we tried a few different ways that we could expand and create new events. And a new event would come up with a couple of volunteers, but it would just fade away because it was too much work for a volunteer to do. There was very few people with the unique skill set that God had given me to handle the administrative business professional along with the ministry and the outdoors and all those things. It's a very unique skill set that God gave me. And so there was a clear sense of calling. I think that's one thing that God was telling us, hey, the door's open. You're supposed to do something. But two, the organization had hit a wall and stayed there for 3-4 years in a row. And so finally the board and we were all on the same page and just said, this is the only way for us to grow. We really didn't want to bring on a staff member, but there was no other way to handle it.
Right. Otherwise you would just plateau.
And similarly, it's the same thing making another hiring decision today. Now that I have other employees, every time you bring on an employee, that means that's money you have to fundraise for and raise. So that's other people's hard-earned dollars. And I got to answer to the Lord for that and be a good steward of that. Sure. So basically you keep going and until you either have hit that dead spot where you just can't grow, like you're at your capacity, or you're getting very, very close to it and you have the momentum to take you past it. At that point, you got to take a leap of faith, and it's a do or die. It's like, how did anybody start a business? You took a leap of faith at some point.
You didn't have all the answers, but this is the need right now. So I know we need to do this. Let's go for it.
Go for it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned like having new offices, different locations. Now, like multi-state, you mentioned 5 or 6 states just in talking about what you got going on. So I'm assuming that the wall's different. It's bigger, but did you hit another wall? Like, what was it that made you say, okay, now we need to expand here and here and here? Was it strategic, like in these locations, or was it more organic? Like, hey, I don't know, God's bringing up these people and we got to deploy them somewhere. Like, how did that go?
The answer is yes. It's a little bit of all of it. I'm a strategic thinker, so I always am looking towards the long term. I mean, I like to play chess. I'll do that for fun, right? But the way that you really confirm that God's moving you in a direction is people and pieces to the puzzle that just get provided for you. And so, we're looking to branch out. Our motivation between branching out isn't to grow a brand or a business or a nonprofit or anything like that. I don't have aspirations. And really, at this point, I don't really care if people know who I am. What I really care about are that there is not another ministry with our focus in the nation currently. You see some individuals with a very outreach-oriented focus, but not an organization. And the handful of outdoor ministries that are out there, they tend to be around kids, veterans, or just helping Christians hunt and fish with other Christians. They're not trying to break down the walls and just specifically reach guys that would never come to church with you. And so there's this whole subculture within the American culture that is not hearing the gospel presented in a language that they understand inside of their culture. And as a person who lives inside of that culture and who loves that community, I can't stand for it. So if nobody else is filling that gap in across the nation, then we're going to find a way to. So that's why I want to keep growing and pushing. And then, so if you have that long-term goal of, well, we want to work towards reaching every outdoorsman with the gospel in the U.S. first and potentially the world. So what are those strategic steps to get you there? Are there strategic states? Are there strategic subsets within the outdoorsman subculture? For example, bass fishermen, they're very different than elk hunters. So are there different steps that you have to reach that subset? Which subsets have the most spider web connections into other parts of the community, so that if you're going to put your time and your effort and your dollars into a specific area, what's the potential long-term reward? It's a risk-reward business decision at that point. Like, what makes sense? And then you confirm it if God starts providing the people and the places. And sometimes you go someplace and it's just like the doors, they just start opening. Like, you can almost succeed despite yourself.
Right. Yeah.
And you go, okay, the Lord's providing us some opportunity here. Let's keep putting eggs in that basket until the Lord says otherwise. And then if he does, we'll move on.
No, that's huge. I've told people that about, and I think you and I've talked about that, the military chaplaincy, like being an Army chaplain, it's its own subculture. And it's its own language even, just like a fisherman speaks fisherman. A hunter speaks hunter, like I don't speak hunter. But yeah, the heart is the most important part, is like, these people need the gospel. And I can't do this over here and neglect what's right here because this is what God's given me. And then, he blesses the work as you do it. He gives you what you need, when you need it, as you need it.
And sometimes you got to take a big step of faith before you get that confirmation from the Lord. Sometimes he waits to provide till you step out. That happens a lot. It's how it happens with fundraising for us. We almost always have to make the commitment and step out, not knowing how the funding will come before all of a sudden, in some miraculous way, the money comes in.
You mentioned your skill set. You're not a pre-packaged guy. You're not a cookie cutter type of dude. You've got the ability to administer, like you've said, business sense and some legal sense. You also, because you fundraise, you have to have good people skills. A guy who lives
might differ there.
Yeah. Well, you got to be able to speak. You got to be able to fake it at least, right? You got to be able to speak and like convince people to support what you're doing. But you also have to connect with these guys who are not the same kind of guys that are speaking at galas and oh, by the way, you've also got, like, as your team grows, now you've got this leadership piece.
Sure.
Both volunteers and paid folks. So what about all of that is the hardest part for you? And what has helped you deal with the challenging areas of that?
The challenges don't stop. I feel like the most unqualified but most uniquely equipped person for the job. And in some sense, I think that idea of approaching it, I approach the job like I'm not qualified for it. I think that helps me not take it for granted in some sense. And it keeps me humble in dealing with people, because every year as the organization has grown, at some point in the year, I start feeling like I'm actually kind of getting good at this job. And then we take this big step, or a door opens or something, and it's totally new. It's bigger. It's something I've never encountered. And I'm right back to where I started, where I have no idea how to do this job, like, at all. I don't get it. I constantly find myself in situations where I'm going, I don't know how to do this, Lord. Like, what am I supposed to do here? And as I talk to people, most of the other people don't know either, because there's not another organization like
this. There's not a playbook. And
so I think that's somewhat purposeful. I know that the Lord has gifted me in a very, very unique way. I mean, I'm competing professionally on the redfish tournament trail. So I'm fishing against the very best of the best in the redfish world. And Aaron's my partner. We're one of the best in the world at what we do. And that earns me the opportunity to speak to anglers, because I know what I'm talking about and I can back it up with tournament winnings. And I'm a published author, so I can write. It's something that's always happened, and that lets me get in magazines, and it lets me get on social media and things like that. I have business sense and can balance a budget and can take big steps of faith. I'm not afraid of risk and all those things. I can speak in public. What you were talking about, a people person. I'm not a people person. I never have been. I'm a loner. I have more tendency towards depression and isolation than I do to gravitate towards people. My safe place is alone in a tree stand with a bow in my hands and nobody but God. But I think the Lord has made me a good vision caster, and that may be more important than being a people person, particularly as a leader, because it doesn't matter what aspect you lead from. If you can cast vision, then people are going to follow. And that's whether you're writing, whether you're saying something on Facebook, or whether you're getting up in front of a gala with several hundred people there, or whether you're in a little small group with 4 or 5 guys gathered around a campfire, or in a podcast with, I don't know who's listening, or just you. Maybe you're the only one that listens to this.
Maybe 2 other guys somewhere.
But if you can cast a vision for the ministry and for what God is doing, and what makes a good vision caster, it's somewhat just being passionate about what you're doing, because passion rubs off on people. You can't help but care. if someone else really cares about something and they do a good job of explaining what it is they care about and why, and it's something that honors the Lord, people tend to resonate with that and relate to it. And you don't have to be a people person. So I know that the Lord has built all of those things into me, and that means He's created me for this position. And so I think some of the ability to keep going forward is that confidence knowing that God created me in a very unique way. He broke a mold. And I believe that's true with everybody. My wife is so incredibly unique and just a fascinating person because she is so individualistic and so unique. And all of the people I keep running into, I find fascinating and unique. And when I know that God has created me in this sense, it gives me a lot of confidence to go, I may not know how to do this, but God called me to it and there's nobody better for it. So I just have to trust at some point God's going to show me how to do what I do next and figure it out as I go. I mean, seems like that's what life is. It's just figure it out as we go and try to honor God in what you do. And He seems to make the rest work out.
Yeah, especially the Christian life. It's like if you wait until you've got it all figured out, then you'll never actually take the first step.
I mean, it's called faith for a reason.
Right.
It's not knowledge. It's not science. It's in my head. I know God is going to provide. So you have to walk like He's going to provide, even if there's a little part of you that doubts and isn't sure. And then He always provides.
Right. And then when He does, you get to experience the joy of faith, of the provision, which wouldn't be there otherwise. So.
It is. And God, it's unique and God gets all the credit for growing something like this. But God is incredibly gracious to share some of that credit too, because He's created us to also be creators. It's part of how we're created in God's image. And so for someone like me who I enjoy creating, I enjoy doing, I know all that comes from God's image. And so He gets the glory for it, yet He allows me to experience some of that too. And so you get that, like you're saying, that sense of accomplishment, that you did something that matters, that you know, and then even other people recognize, not that you ever do it for ego or to be built up, but the Lord's given me a place in society and a place in community, a place that's respected, a place that's you're able to make a difference in people's lives. And like even in the Redfish tournament trail, He made me good at what I do so people will shut up and listen.
Yeah.
But when you leave the tournament and go, I didn't just win the tournament, we made a difference in somebody's life, you get to live with that. So even though God should get the glory, He lets us share in it in some sense. And it's a really neat experience to do that. It's part of faith-filled living, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was just reading a book. So I teach a few classes, online classes, leadership classes at a Christian college. And I was reading this book, and in the book, the guy talked about, I think he called it the 3 circles. And I'm pointing back to like the idea of what a guy I interviewed last year called sacred calling. You have a unique calling on your life. I have a unique calling on my life. Even if we're both called to ministry in some sense, it's not going to look the same. But basically the 3 circles were, what are you really passionate about? The second circle was, what are you really good at? What can you do as good or better than anybody else in the world? And then the third one was the practical one of just, okay, and what can pay your bills? Yeah. So he was basically, the argument was when you get those 3 things, whether it's an individual or an organization or whatever, that's when you've really found, your sweet spot of just, this is what I'm really passionate about. This is what I'm really good at. In your case, fishing. So you get the fishing and hunting deal overlapping with the passion about reaching, this overlooked group of people for the gospel. And now you found a way to pay your bills with it.
That's the administrative business part.
Right.
That's what pays the bills.
Yes. And that to me is the other 2, like, are hobbies or any number of things. But if you can figure out how to bring in that, I have to do this so that I get to do these other 2 things.
Sure.
Yeah. Appreciate you sharing about that. So one of the things I found being a lifelong communicator is anytime you communicate, you're going to fail. And I found that like people can identify with your failures much more than they can with your successes. So one of my favorite questions to ask people is just give me a time, but a time when you failed at communicating in your role as, Mr. Blast Cast guy. What'd you learn from it, and how did it change, or did it change how you communicate going forward?
I'm going to predate Blast Cast with that, because the first real failure in communication that pops. As soon as you say failure in communication, the first 5 years of marriage, I mean, was pretty much a failure of communication in my part. It really was. And my wife is incredibly individualistic, very, very strong woman. She is not the kind of stereotypical go along with the flow, easy going. She's very individualistic, very strong personality, does not mind speaking her mind and telling you what's on her mind, and incredibly gifted and skilled, like incredibly gifted and skilled. She's fascinating to me. She's very unique, and we've been married over 20 years now. So, nothing's changed. The first 5 years of our marriage, I was just not a good husband. I wasn't, and because I wasn't a good husband, I wasn't a good leader. We had our first kid really early on. So we were single income because it was very important to her to be a mom, even though she really wanted to be outside of the home. Like she had passion to, but she prioritized being in the home with our kids. And I failed to recognize that tension within her and to help her find opportunities to succeed and to just be her, not just a mom. And so I was focusing on my opportunities outside the home and growing in ministry. And I was leading in men's ministry, volunteering for Blast Cast. I even took some seminary courses. I was growing in a business world, working for a mutual fund company, all those things that I was doing outside the home. Meanwhile, she was inside the home with little kids, kind of drowning in it because she wasn't getting to express her own personality and her own desire to make an impact in the world and her own desire to grow as an individual and to be something besides just mom. Not that not being a mom isn't enough, but it wasn't just her. And so I failed to hear that from her. I failed to recognize it from her. And I failed my job as a leader in that marriage. Like I would say even now in Blast Cast, my biggest job function is to create opportunities for other people to succeed. That's how the ministry grows. When it's other people doing the talking and event coordination and all those things on a volunteer basis, not just me, because Blast Cast, if it's limited to me, it can only grow so big. It can only reach so many people.
As far as you can switch your own.
Exactly. Well, the same is true in marriage. Our marriage can make some impact on the world, but if it's dependent on me being out there in the world, it can only make so much impact. The world is a far, far better place with Naomi Cooper out there making an impact and doing her thing. Like she's pretty dang incredible and has her own set of very unique gifts and abilities. And I failed to build those up in her. Like I failed to recognize all of those things. And even when she was struggling at home, I failed to be home sometimes when I needed to free her up to get out there. But a lot of it was just, I didn't validate those things in her. I didn't really take the time to just listen and hear her out. I didn't give her the encouraging words and the reassurance that she needed. And I was too focused on what I was doing outside the home and then what we were doing as parents that I failed to see where she wasn't being fulfilled. And that's my biggest failure as a leader ever in life. And a lot of it revolves around communication. And it's interesting what the Lord taught me through that experience because it impacts Blast Cast to this day. I mean, I've got to get these volunteers that are living ordinary 9-to-5 job lives and families and all that to prioritize making a difference in the world and to get outside of their family, outside the walls of their church, outside of just their hunting and fishing buddies, and actually make a difference in the world and in people's lives. And they tell me they believe in Jesus. They tell me they want to fulfill the Great Commission. They want to share their faith. But then when it comes down to it, they keep choosing to stay back in that huddle and not do. And so I want to create opportunities for them to get out and to grow, to provide training and support what's necessary to kick them out of their comfort zones and to go do something. And then for those of them who are chomping at the bit to go, like my wife really was, well, what do I have to do to sit down with them and hear, like, what is it that makes them passionate? Like, what makes them come alive? What are their unique gifts? And so since I have the margin to do the administration and the business stuff, what can I create to best utilize their passions and their abilities? And I have to have that communication line open between me and that individual in order to go create that opportunity that they need. And then I get to watch them go blossom and succeed. It's how I lead guys. Even though I'm not telling them what to do, I'm behind the scenes helping nudge them and encourage them. And it's what I should have done for Naomi. I think the last 15 years of our marriage, I've done a much better job of that, but it took failing for 5 years. And it ended up making me a better leader of a volunteer-driven organization because I failed at 5 years of marriage.
Sure, yeah.
Sorry, Naomi, but it served a purpose. And becoming a better husband and leading her better as a husband and creating opportunities for her, or just supporting her as she creates those opportunities, whatever the case may be, it's made me a better leader of an organization.
And the Christian life and leadership in general is not compartmentalized. So you're a better husband, you're a better leader, your Blast Cast is better off, you're a better father, you're probably better in all these areas because you had 5 years of failure that
100%.
that God's redeeming you and will keep redeeming you. Now, that's a good example. I appreciate you using one too outside of an organizational context because, it's all tied together. Okay, one of my other favorite questions to ask people is if the present Brodie Cooper could visit with a younger Brodie Cooper who had more hair on top of his head. And it may be the same advice you just mentioned about when you felt it communicating, but what's some advice about leadership you would give your younger self?
It's easy. Be a better husband. I mean, to be a good husband, you have to learn how to lead. And it's not just helping her get out of her comfort zones, or it's not just help create opportunities. It's also things like helping our family and her as an individual get out of comfort zones and leave secure areas. Because a lot of times wives, one of their things is they don't want anything risky. They want security. But a good leader can lead a family, an organization, or whatever it is into things that are inherently risky, because that's how you grow. That's how you grow as a family. That's how you grow your marriage. It's how you grow your organization, your business, your church, whatever it is. You have to be able to embrace risk and go out into the unknown and not really know always what you're doing. But that's what God calls us to do. That's what faith is. You don't always know how it works out. So to me, marriage is so multifaceted in that sense. It requires you to learn how to communicate. You're going to have to be a good communicator to be a good leader. It requires you to be able to cast vision, because if you can't cast vision, your wife is not going to follow you.
Right.
Your kids are not going to follow you.
Right. No one is.
It requires you to really learn how to use discernment and to assess people. Because if you really want to lead your family, then you need to look at your wife and your kids, and you need an accurate assessment of skills, abilities, spiritual gifts, leadership qualities, maybe even things that they don't see in themselves. And it's your job as a leader to help them. Like, think about, one of your kids that lacks confidence or something, and they just think they're good at nothing. Well, it's your job as a parent to help them find the things they're good at and gain confidence.
And call that thing out of them that they don't even know.
That's it. It's the same thing as a husband. A lot of times that's what needs to happen with your wife. That's how you get her out and to embrace the risky things, and to help her see that, hey, God made you for this. Like, you can do it. And not only can you do it, you don't have to do it alone. I'm going to be there with you. So again, that's communication to say that, but being a vision caster, using discernment, all those things are so necessary to lead an organization. Every volunteer team that I lead, and my staff team that I lead, I have to have a good assessment of their particular makeup. What are their strengths and weaknesses? What are their spiritual gifts, their abilities, their skills, things that make them come alive? What are their weaknesses? What are they lacking? Do we need to recruit another person that fills in some of those weaknesses? Because that's going to make them a stronger team. And then what can I do alongside to kind of usher and nudge and kind of pull them into the areas that they're really passionate about and good at? How can I assess their weaknesses and not just go, hey, you guys suck at this.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And you need to get better.
Because that doesn't work with your wife either. Yeah. You say, hey, you really suck at this. Apparently wives don't like
Fix that. Okay.
So, but when you learn how to talk to your wife about maybe things in your marriage that aren't great, when you figure out how to talk to your wife about those things, all of a sudden having a conversation with some random dude about things in your organization that aren't great, it's a lot easier because you kind of have an idea how not to step on toes and how to do it constructively, or maybe even when to step on toes, like when it's necessary. So I would just say go back and be a better husband, spend more time with my wife, but that doesn't necessarily mean at home. It might mean finding ways for us to go outside the home and embrace things in our community together and just explore our bounds, push the limits. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It makes perfect sense. I was having a conversation with a military buddy of mine, and we were talking about relational intelligence.
Yeah.
And how when we were younger, it was all like knowledge, proficiency, learning things by the book, whatever. Because you think, oh, that's really what will push me over the edge and make me a great leader or whatever. And the older we get and the longer we serve in our marriages or in leadership or as husbands or fathers or in the Army, is just that whole idea of relational intelligence is like, you know what, I can't approach you like I would want to be approached because you're different than I am. And if I interviewed a guy last year, current NCO of mine, and he was saying that he got out of the Rangers, Army Rangers, into the Army Reserves, which is just much more casually back, and took a buddy of his, took the same approach, like the very in your face, very, get your crap together approach. And the guy ended up killing himself. The soldier ended up killing himself. And he was like, thank God that I didn't have to learn that lesson that way. That like I need to just listen to people, understand where they are. Everybody's different. So I found that as I go before the Lord with that and then try to pursue learning those things through experience and others who've done it, it's like, yeah, this whole idea of learning how I relate to others and how they relate to me, my wife, my kids, my congregation, my soldiers, my volunteers, it's everyone wins rather than just like, all right, get out of my way. I'm going to do this thing over here. Good luck. Yeah. Or you suck at this approach,
I would just argue that there's a reason that God created marriage. And this is one of the primary reasons is there's no one more different than us, than a woman. And to learn how to live, not only to learn how to live together, but to learn how to thrive together.
Yes. Yeah.
And we've been married for 20 years. It's like, I know everything about her that annoys me. I mean, I do. And I know everything about me that annoys her. But to be able to work past those things and to find ways to work together hand in hand, to take it to the next level and enjoy some time together, but also to realize that there are going to be those seasons where we don't always really like each other very much, but we know how to coexist and appreciate and respect each other in those times and to still thrive in life, even when we're going through a season where maybe we don't like each other that much.
Right.
Maybe areas are struggling elsewhere, but we can realize it's just a season and you can appreciate that person for who they are, even if they're screwing something up. When you learn how to do that, you can take that into any organization. And it's relationships that make the world go round. And that's me, an isolationist that struggles with depression, realizing that most of the good things in life we really experience come through relationships. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely how we lead and grow organizations, anything like that. You have to know how to do relationships. People as a whole suck, but individually, people are pretty fascinating when you really take the time to figure them out.
Yeah.
Quit focusing on yourself and just really figure them out. They have pretty fascinating stories and histories, and they may have weaknesses, but when you really get to know them, you understand why that weakness exists, and you can have compassion and grace. And so when you treat every individual like that, because you learn how to treat your wife like that, all of a sudden you can look at a whole organization and where you would get discouraged by a lack of activity or volunteers you look at them all as individuals and you realize the backstories and the complications of it, and you have much more grace and patience with people, and you figure out the little ways to motivate individuals, and then all of a sudden you see the group come together. It's pretty neat to see.
It is, yeah. And in that, probably the greatest lesson for me that I've learned is the people are not the means to the end, the people are the end in and of themselves, which helps me actually care about them more.
Absolutely.
Be more patient, more gracious on that. So last question I have for you off script. Guys who fish, I know, love to tell great fishermen's tales. So you got some particular amazing story that no one would ever believe or something that came from a hunting or fishing trip?
There's a bunch of them. I've almost drowned a couple of times. I've been in a head-on boat collision. That was a pretty crazy experience.
Wow.
Fell out of a boat in flood waters and got swept downstream and out of sight before. I've sunk a boat. I've had some crazy stuff hunting, but not quite like that. I guess the head-on boat collision was the wildest because I should have probably died that day. I'd been out fishing with a buddy and his son. We were in a little aluminum boat and we had caught a bunch of flounder and speckled trout, and we were going to come up into the marsh to scout for ducks on our way back. And so we were taking these little marsh ditches. And when I say marsh ditches, like you hunt in lakes and ponds, but the ditches to get from one pond to another, a lot of times are not much wider than a boat. But it's shallow water, so you have to, like, you can't just putt-putt. You have to keep the boat moving and keep momentum. Well, we went through one little ditch that had one blind curve where some switch cane had grown up on the inside of that curve. And so we're going around that curve at about 30 miles an hour. And then all of a sudden, here's another boat coming the opposite way. I mean, it happened in the blink of an eye. And all I remember is hearing a loud bang and then the sound of water. And then I was out. And when I came to and regained consciousness, I was at the bottom of the bayou. And I remember basically waking up and my arms were spread out and I'm looking up through the water and seeing rays of sunshine through it. It's a real tannin stained kind of brownish water. I see these rays of sunshine shining down, and it was like I didn't realize where I was. I didn't know what happened. I'm just looking at the sunshine and I hear this voice, and it's speaking in second or third person, whatever it is. I'm not an English major, but so just said, you have to push up so you can breathe. And it doesn't register. I know now I had a pretty good concussion. And it said it again, you have to push up so you can breathe, and just kept repeating it. You have to push up so you can breathe with more and more intention. And finally it was like, you have to push up so you can breathe. And all of a sudden it's like, I'm in the water. I'm on the bottom of the bayou. I have to push up so I can breathe. And I remember feeling with my hands and feeling the mud in the bottom of the bayou with my fingers. And I pushed up, and I was in about chest deep water up to about my armpits. And as I got to the top of the water, I realized that my boat propeller is like spinning like about 2 feet from my head. It was a tiller steer, so it had throttled down, but it was jammed into the bank. But I grabbed the back of the boat so I could keep the prop off me and not get cut. And then at that point, you go into like damage assessment, like where are your people? And so I looked to my left. My buddy, the adult, was in the water about 20 feet to my left out in the middle of the bayou. And then I'm trying to find the kid. We had a kid that was maybe 10 years old in the boat with us. And I'm trying to find the two guys from the other boat. Well, one of the guys from the other boat comes running down the bank. It got thrown way up on the shore, runs into my boat, yanks the kill switch and kills the motor. And we go into full on panic looking for this kid because we cannot find the kid. And we're hollering for him and going, and we can't figure out where this kid is at. Well, in my boat, I had been fishing, and we had this big cooler that was full of trout and flounder, ice, typical stuff. Well, the kid was sitting down in the middle of the boat. This big cooler was just in front of him. Well, when we had the collision, it snapped the bungee cords that attached to the cooler. And the cooler apparently flew up in the air. It dumped all the fish and ice out because there was fish and ice floating all down the bayou. And then turned upside down and landed perfectly on top of the kid. So the kid was wadded up like a ball on the inside of the upside down cooler and so frozen from shock that he couldn't respond to us or verbally audible everything. The guy in the boat from the other boat noticed a foot sticking out from under the cooler and said, I think he's in the boat. And the kid was just sitting there in shock, like wide-eyed, just, I know a podcast, you can't see the face that I'm making, but, it's like he was so in shock that he couldn't talk. But he was the only person out of all 5 people involved in the accident that didn't have so much as a bruise.
Oh, wow.
That had an injury or anything. I probably took the worst of it. I had a bad concussion, and I bent a pedestal mount all the way to the floor with my thigh. And It wasn't fun, but everybody walked out of it. The boats weren't so great. Yeah, I probably should have died that day. So yeah, you get these cool stories to tell, and it makes people listen. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. Well, hey, man, I appreciate you opening your house up, letting me sit at your dining room table, sharing some steak and eggs, and
Elk steak and eggs.
yeah,
Elk
steak and eggs. So, but no, I really have. I appreciate getting to know you, man, and I'm grateful for your wisdom, for sharing with me. And I wanted to give you the opportunity too to just tell folks where could they find out more about Blast Cast before we sign off.
You can follow us on Facebook, Blast Cast Ministries. You can also find me there. And blastandcast.org is our website. We started up on Instagram too, so you can find us there.
Cool. All right, Brodie. Well, appreciate it. And thank you guys for tuning in. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us today. The Leading Lounge is brought to you by Communicate to Care, where we are building better leaders by building better people. For more information, visit us online at www.communicatetoCare.com. This is your host, Dr. Justin Dubose, and we'll see you next time, right here in the Leading Lounge.